It was Christmas Eve, and instead of being at home with my family, I had to take on a last-minute delivery. It wasn't common to get such late orders, but the pay was good, and I needed the money. The address was in a town I'd never been to before. I got lost several times on the snowy backroads, with only the shadows of trees covered in frost visible under the dim moonlight. I turned on the radio to break the silence, but even the Christmas music couldn't ease the unsettling feeling I had. The atmosphere grew denser as I drove down that lonely road. I started to sense that something wasn't right, but I couldn't turn back now. Passing through a small forest, I glanced at the left side mirror, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was just a silhouette. But when I looked a second time, it was clear. A Santa Claus figure staring at me. His beard was stained with blood, and his eyes were completely black, empty, like two dark holes that absorbed all light. I let out a scream and jerked the steering wheel, almost driving the truck off the road. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. When I looked again, the figure had disappeared. I must be exhausted, I thought, but my heart was still pounding. I kept driving, trying to shake off what I had just seen. However, something even worse was about to happen. The music on the radio started to distort, and the carols turned into a cacophony of warped voices. I changed the station, but the noise didn't go away. Then, among the screeching sounds, I heard a deep, raspy voice. "Where are you taking my gift?" said the voice mockingly. It was the same voice I had imagined coming from the bloody Santa figure. I slammed my hand on the radio's off button, but the silence that followed was even worse. My hands were trembling, and the air inside the cab felt colder. I tried to keep calm and move forward. Suddenly, as I turned a sharp curve, I saw something in the middle of the road. It was a man dressed as Santa Claus. I didn't have time to brake. I hit him with the truck. The impact was strong, and the vehicle shook violently. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded a bit before coming to a stop. I sat there, frozen for a few seconds, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was going to faint. I took a deep breath and got out of the truck. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I walked slowly to the front of the truck, and there it was, a trail of fresh blood in the snow. I looked around, expecting to see the body, but there was no one there. The blood was there, but the body was gone. It was impossible for anyone to get up after a hit like that. I pulled out my phone and called the police, stammering my story. "I hit someone. They were dressed as Santa Claus. They were right here." The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They inspected the area, followed the blood trail that disappeared into the trees, but found no body. One of the officers looked at me with a mix of disbelief and concern. "Are you sure it was a person?" he asked. "Sometimes animals can leave similar tracks if they're injured and run off." "It wasn't an animal," I replied, my voice trembling. "It was a man, dressed as Santa Claus. I saw him in the mirror before he appeared on the road. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." The officers exchanged glances, clearly doubting my mental state. They took note of my statement but found no evidence to support my story. They told me to rest, suggesting I might have been hallucinating due to exhaustion. I got back into the truck, still in shock. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was almost 11:30 at night. I still had a few kilometers left to deliver the package, and although every fiber of my being was screaming to leave, I decided to continue. I didn't want to return without completing the delivery, even though something inside me told me I was making a big mistake. When I finally reached the delivery address, I found myself in front of an old, abandoned house. The yard was covered in snow, and Christmas decorations hung from the windows and the roof. But these decorations weren't cheerful, they were rotten, as if untouched for decades. The Christmas lights dangled rusted and broken, and a wreath of dried leaves hung on the front door. It was like time had stopped there 30 years ago. I got out of the truck with the package in my hands, looking around for any signs of life. But there was no one. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of snow under my boots. I left the package on the doorstep and took a few steps back. That's when I felt it again, the presence. I slowly turned and saw it reflected in the side mirror of the truck. The same Santa Claus was there, staring at me with those empty black eyes. This time, he smiled, revealing blood-stained teeth. He whispered something I could barely make out, but it sounded like a thank you. Thank you for the delivery. I stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to move. When I blinked, he was gone. Without waiting another second, I ran to the truck, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked one last time in the rearview mirror. The figure of Santa Claus stood in the middle of the road, waving at me with a bloody hand while the house faded into the darkness of the night. I never took another last-minute delivery again, and every time I see a Santa Claus on the street, I shiver. I know what I saw that night, and even if no one believes me, I don't need them to. Because I know that I delivered something far more sinister than a simple package. I never plan to work right before Christmas. I usually prefer to spend those days at home, relaxing with a warm drink and enjoying the calm, far from the asphalt and the long night drives. However, that morning, I got an unexpected call. A company offered me a last-minute job, transporting a sealed trailer with toys to a warehouse in a small mountain town. The offer was irresistible. The pay was 3 times what I normally charge. Given the circumstances and the generous payment, I decided to accept. I arrived at the pickup point around noon. When I got there, a man handed me the job documents. I found it strange that the trailer was sealed and had specific instructions not to open it under any circumstances. They're just toys, I thought, but it was odd for there to be such confidentiality. I asked the guy why I couldn't open the trailer, and he simply replied in a dry tone, "It's the client's instructions. Just do your job and don't ask questions." I shrugged and, after hooking up the trailer to my truck, I set off. The route was long, winding through mountainous roads that were barely traveled. As I ascended the snow-covered, twisting roads, the landscape grew increasingly gloomy. The sky was overcast, and the clouds seemed to press down on the mountains. Everything around me was blanketed in a dense fog that limited visibility to only a few meters. After several hours of driving, I arrived at the given address. I checked the GPS to make sure I was at the right place because what I saw in front of me was not a toy warehouse but an old, dilapidated building. I stared at the charred walls and broken windows, some boarded up with wood. As I got closer, I noticed clear signs of a fire. The sign at the entrance, half-burnt and corroded by time, was barely legible, but I managed to make it out: St. Nicholas Orphanage. A shiver ran down my spine. I decided to get out of the truck to investigate, hoping to find someone who could receive the delivery. I walked towards the entrance, pushing open the rusty gate, which creaked as it swung. The interior was dark and cold, as if the fire that once ravaged the place still left an icy chill in the air. As I moved through the hallway, I stopped. I heard distant children's laughter, faint at first but growing clearer. "Thanks for the toys," some voices said cheerfully. I was surprised to hear these voices in such a place. I looked around, searching for the children, but there was no one. I headed towards one of the rooms where the sounds seemed to be coming from. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. A shiver ran down my spine, and the cheerful children's voices began to transform. "Now leave," I heard clearly, in a much deeper, almost guttural tone. It was as if someone was whispering directly into my ear. My heart pounded in my chest, an overwhelming sense of danger washed over me. I didn't want to stay there a second longer. I ran out of the building. When I got back to the parking lot, I was hit with the shock of my life. The trailer was unhooked from the truck and had toppled over onto its side. The doors were wide open. I couldn't understand how this had happened. I cautiously approached, but when I peeked inside, it was completely empty. There was no sign of the toys I was supposed to be transporting. Without a second thought, I sprinted to the truck, jumped in, and started the engine with trembling hands. I didn't even try to reattach the trailer. I left it there and hit the gas, speeding away from the orphanage. My breathing was rapid and shallow, fear gripped my chest. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened, but I knew I didn't want to stick around to find out. After driving for about 20 kilometers, I saw the lights of a small roadside bar. I decided to stop there to calm myself down. I went in, ordered a coffee, and pulled out my phone. I needed to know more about that place. I searched the name of the orphanage online, St. Nicholas Orphanage. I found a news article from 15 years ago. My blood ran cold as I read it. The article described a devastating fire that had engulfed the orphanage on Christmas Eve. 21 children and 2 caretakers died in the blaze. The firefighters said the fire started in the toy room, and the strangest part was that after the incident, the remains of the toys disappeared. They weren't found in the rubble or anywhere nearby. According to the report, the place had been abandoned ever since. I decided to search for the name of the client who had hired me, hoping to find some kind of explanation. When I typed the name into Google, I froze. The name matched one of the caretakers who had died in the fire. A knot formed in my stomach. It was impossible. I gripped my phone tightly, trying to find a rational explanation. As I glanced around the bar, I noticed people staring at me with curiosity. Maybe it was my pale face or my clear state of distress. I got up, left some money on the counter, and quickly walked out. I climbed into the truck and just sat there, taking deep breaths. I couldn't go through with this job. I decided to drive back to the city, forfeiting the payment. As I continued down the road, I glanced one last time in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a small child smiling and waving at me from where the trailer should have been. I blinked, and he was gone. I don't know what really happened that night. I never told anyone what I saw and heard. But since then, every Christmas, I avoid taking jobs. And every time someone offers me a deal that seems too good to be true, I make sure to turn it down. Because there are things better left undiscovered and routes better left untraveled, especially on Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve. My family and I were driving back to my parents' house on the outskirts of Chicago after spending the day with them. The snow was falling steadily, covering the road and reducing visibility. Despite the slippery road and the isolation, everything seemed normal. Emily, my wife, was asleep in the passenger seat, while our kids, Max and Lily, played quietly in the back. We had driven this stretch of road many times before, a secondary highway that passed through lonely forests and open fields with little traffic. Suddenly, the flashing lights of an emergency vehicle ahead made me slow down. I thought it might be an accident, so I prepared to stop. As we got closer, I saw a truck overturned on the side of the road, right in front of us. Its cargo was scattered across the snow, and the truck's emergency lights were flashing, but there were no other vehicles in sight. We stopped a few meters from the overturned truck. Emily woke up, confused, but I told her to stay in the car while I went over to see what had happened. The road was narrow, and the weather was worsening. I quickly walked toward the truck, and as I got closer, I realized the accident didn't seem recent. The snow around the truck was undisturbed, as if no emergency services had been there. No one had approached the scene. Just the overturned truck in the snow. When I reached the cab, I saw the driver. He was slumped over the steering wheel, with his head dropped to the side, almost as if unconscious. His clothes were soaked with sweat, but his face looked expressionless, almost pale. I spoke to him several times, trying to wake him up, but he didn't react. Finally, I tried to open the door, and with some effort, I managed to do so. The man seemed to be in shock, but something didn't add up. His eyes were fixed on a point, as if he wasn't really there, trapped in some sort of trance. I looked closer, but there was no blood, no obvious injuries. I didn't understand what was going on. I decided to try to move him, but just as I was about to, I heard a car approaching. I quickly turned around, and when I looked back at the driver, he was gone. A chill ran down my spine. There were no signs that the man had moved, no footprints in the snow. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I looked around, but there was no trace of him, no sign of him having been there. I rushed back to the car and told Emily to call emergency services. She did so immediately, but while she was on the phone, the man didn't appear again. When the paramedics arrived, they inspected the scene carefully, but they couldn't find the driver or any evidence of his presence. The truck was overturned, yes, but there were no signs of a recent accident, and no sign that anyone had been trapped. The police arrived shortly after, but they couldn't do much other than fill out a report about the accident. They told us there was nothing more to be done, and left. We stayed there for a while, staring at the overturned truck and the snow-covered road. No one seemed to know what had really happened. The paramedics insisted that we must have been mistaken, that the accident had happened hours earlier, and we just hadn't seen anyone around at that time. On the drive home, I felt disoriented. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. During the drive back, Emily noticed I was quieter than usual. When I asked if she had seen anything strange, she looked at me and nodded slowly. Yes, she said, something didn't add up. He didn't seem right. Didn't you think that was strange? I don't know, I replied, but something tells me it wasn't normal. When we got home, I tried to continue with the night. But something kept nagging at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up to look through some old photos on my phone, trying to distract myself from what had happened. That's when I came across a photo that froze me. It was from a Christmas party, several years ago, at Emily's parents' house. And it was Todd, an old family friend. I remember that Todd had been a good friend of my parents and my in-laws. In fact, he had been the one to transport goods for the company he worked for, and on one occasion, he had taken us with him in his truck when we were younger. The photo was taken just months before his disappearance, in a traffic accident that happened on that same road. It was a strange accident because, although the police found his truck overturned, they never found his body. The official version was that he disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and even though they searched for weeks, they never found any trace of him. I didn't understand at the time, but when I saw the photo, something made me feel an inexplicable unease. The man I had seen in the overturned truck that night, the driver who had disappeared before the paramedics arrived, it was Todd. The coincidence hit me hard. I remembered the rumors about Todd's accident, how they never found clear evidence that he was involved in the crash. Some people said his spirit was trapped, wandering the road, searching for something he could never find. I never believed in such things, but that night made me question everything I knew. Had it really been Todd I saw that night? Had his soul been trapped in that accident, repeating the same scene over and over, unable to find peace?